I'm April Chatham-Carpenter.
And I'm Glen White. Welcome back to A Braver Arkansas, and if this is your first time joining us, welcome.
This show is a partnership between Braver Angels Arkansas and Arkansas TV. It's focused on how we can talk to each other across our differences. This week we want to go deeper on Braver Angels Arkansas specifically, what we do, who we are, what we've been up to in the state.
Our guest today is Lisa McNeir. Lisa is a leader in our statewide group and a now retired psychologist. She's been part of our leadership for several years now, and we wanted to talk with Lisa about what she's seen in this work that surprises people.
But before Lisa joins us, Glen, I want to ask you something. You've been involved in Braver Angels Arkansas for longer than I have, and I'm sure that there have been some proof points or some points of impact on you personally that you've seen. You know, we do all these workshops and podcasts, but what have you seen that really has worked and been effective?
Well, several things, but probably the first thing I remember was when I think it was 2018, when we did our very first workshop at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, which is church I attend, and we did skills for bridging the divide is what we called it, and we'll hear some version of that later on in a future episode. But at one point, one Sunday morning, one of the people who was in the class came up to me and let me know about something that had impacted her. She said, I wanted to give you feedback that shortly after we did the workshop, my husband and I went out to California to see some of our family. And while we were there, some of our family members, as we got to talking, we got into politics, and it turns out they have a very different view than we do of things. And it got pretty difficult and tense, but I remembered what we covered in that workshop. So she said she really resolved at that point to start using those skills. And so that conversation continued for a while. And she said after a while, it really seemed to make a difference. And I learned some things that I really was surprised to hear from them. From their standpoint, it made me a little more empathetic about why they felt the way they do, and I think that was also the case the other way around. So she said in the end, we actually wound up having a good time. It kind of settled things down emotionally, and we felt pretty good about the way things left. We still had different viewpoints, but felt it didn't interfere with the family relationship, so that was good. And when I heard that, I just that was an inner smile for me, because it was our first time ever to do the workshop, and I felt like it went okay, but when I heard that, I said, yep, this is going well. I like this.
Proof of concept, and you could see that it really made a difference in somebody else's life. You knew it had in your own, right. But now seeing it make a difference in somebody else's.
That's right. I tell you what, let me ask you a little bit of what you think about the same kind of question, basically. Any special moments that you experienced from Braver Angels activities once you got started?
Yeah, I was thinking about, there have been so many, and a couple actually that related to the abortion issue, which I feel very strongly about. I'm pro-life. With the abortion debate that came out and that we were doing, I was asked to be one of the speakers. And in the debate format that was done, this is a national debate, it was over Zoom, they have the speakers speak on one side of the issue or the other. I don't remember exactly how the resolution was actually worded, but I spoke out as one of the speakers, and then people asked me questions, and then I could kind of sit back and relax and just learn from what other people were saying. Well, one of the things that struck me as people from multiple sides were pro-life and pro-choice were talking were the stories that people were telling that were very personal, and they surprised me. The people that I would have thought were on my side were on my side maybe for different reasons than I expected. And the people on the other side, what I would have called the other side, were there for things that made me really feel empathic towards them. And so it made me realize for the first time, I think, that the same side on an issue doesn't mean that you have the same reasons or the same life experiences, and that storytelling is really important, and that these kinds of issues are often more personal than they are political in terms of why we lean in a particular different direction. So it's important to hear stories. Then after that, I had gotten trained as a moderator in Braver Angels to do workshops, and I remember I did 2 different common ground workshops on abortion. The very first one, people were split by whether they were Republican or Democrat, and the thing that struck me about that was that there were pro-life and pro-choice people on both sides. And I had just assumed that it was primarily the Republicans that were pro-life and the Democrats that were pro-choice, but that was proven false by the number of people that were in this common ground workshop. So the next time we did the workshop, we said, in order for this workshop to be most successful, we need to divide people on where they stand on the issue, not by their political party. And it was something that stuck with me in terms of the way that I had been judging the kind of political party surrounding an issue that was really pretty central to something that I believe strongly in.
That's remarkable, the extent to which people's personal experiences have an impact on their identification with party or ideology. Because sometimes I would think, tribalism and all, that it actually is something different, kind of a basic identity issue. But that's interesting to hear.
You mentioned a term just then that I don't know that you've introduced to the audience. I don't think you need to take a lot of time on it, but
okay.
Tribalism?
Oh, tribalism. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm sure most people have heard about tribalism. Basically, it's the idea that we identify with a particular group or tribe. It kind of goes with the idea of evolutionary psychologists talk about how many, thousands of years ago in the early history of humankind, it was a very dangerous world. And there were dangerous animals, there was no real civilization, and the only way people survived was to gather together in tribes so that they could share the load and the burden of getting resources and food and water and defending against animals and hostile tribes. So that idea of tribalism comes from the notion that people develop this strong social sense, a group identity, which is not just true of humans. You've got, primates, you've got bees and ants and all that have this kind of a group identity. But the idea is that in tribalism, the way we talk about it now with politics, it's related to the notion that we've identified with this particular group over some shared political leanings.
Okay, so that's interesting. So that would ring true then in terms of why I was surprised, because I assumed that my particular tribe would be all in kind of thinking alike, and they really weren't, or the other tribe for that matter, if we're looking at it from the forms of tribes. One of the things that I wanted to follow up on from our first episode, Glenn, was a little bit more on Braver Angels, Arkansas. Is that okay if we talk a little bit about that? Sure. Okay. So Braver Angels, Arkansas actually started in Little Rock in the central Arkansas area, and then what we ended up doing in that organizational structure when COVID happened is we made it into a statewide structure, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we knew we had to meet on Zoom and other ways, right. And we really didn't have a lot of effort that was happening at the local levels. And one of the things that Braver Angels does in any kind of alliance or chapters, as we mentioned in the first episode, is that they try to have balanced leadership. And although I mentioned what I learned about tribes, and we're not all just one monolith or one kind of group or type of person in a particular political party. We do want there to be red Republicans and Democrats, or conservatives and liberals and other leaning people in leadership in this organization. And so you and I, for a while, were state coordinators together. You were the blue, I was the red, and then I think we worked together also as the Braver Angels statewide alliance co-chairs as well. We've moved now into trying to do some a little bit more local level. I know you've worked in developing some opportunities for people by doing presentations. So I think there's a group now in Eureka Springs in the Carroll County area. They're having some civil conversations now at the library in Hot Springs. There's a Monticello group that is working with actually the university or the community college there with students to try to work across different kinds of divides. So a lot of things that are actually happening in Braver Angels, Arkansas, beyond the statewide alliance. Yeah. You want to add anything to that?
I think that's the main thing. You hit most of the alliances. I will say this, we would like to have more. And there are obviously some places that would be very likely candidates. The Northwest Arkansas up in the Fayetteville, Bentonville, Springdale area. There's the Jonesboro idea. Our newsletter editor actually is from Jonesboro. So, and we've talked to people in some of these areas. We just haven't got enough of a core group to put something together yet. So we'd love to see that happen. And maybe Fort Smith, some others. We'll basically be happy to work with anyone in any area who wants to do that.
One of the things that's happened, I know in Hot Springs and in Little Rock and in Conway now, are these civil conversations. What happens in that kind of environment?
The idea is that you invite the public, but you start with some really clear guidelines about what you can do to make a respectful conversation. And oftentimes you have a particular topic for the day or for that meeting, and you just let everybody know what the guidelines are, and then have people talk about it with some moderators, some of our nationally trained moderators. Will have them make sure that people take their turn. It doesn't kind of go off into a disrespectful way. And it's been really encouraging to see how that's gone. People seem to have a hunger for that. Mm-hmm. And so they come together and talk, follow the rules, and it's real good to see people with different views having a respectful conversation.
So what do you think about dividing? I mean, do you divide those conversations along party lines when people show up? Do you say you've got to have a different perspective on a particular issue, or do you just take whoever shows up and you start talking? We experiment with several different ways of doing that. We divided into the red, blue kind of thing. We had people take turns. We said whoever, whenever. I'm not sure we've ever fully decided what's the best way to go, so we decided that whoever is going to sponsor a conversation like this in their community can make their own decisions about that. Okay. And sometimes I know in Hot Springs they work with the local libraries as well. So to be the local library there to be able to host that, so
right.
It's a good place to be able to do that. And we did that in Little Rock as well.
Right. Right.
Philip Fletcher, who we'll hear from in another episode, I think is going to be. He talks about doing it at coffee shops. So
yeah.
There's multiple different ways.
Yeah.
Well, we have a special guest today that's going to be joining us, and our special guest is Lisa McNeir. Lisa has been a Braver Angels Arkansas Alliance co-chair, and she is in the blue realm of that. Ray Hanley, who some people probably know from his work in Little Rock and other places with state government, is the red co-chair. So if you ever see Ray out there, you can ask him about Braver Angels as well, and he'll give you an earful to hear about that. But Lisa's going to talk to us about that. How did you get to know Lisa in the first place?
Well, we are both psychologists, and now we're both retired psychologists, but I guess I'm not even sure I remember the first time I met Lisa, but we've both operated in psychological circles in Little Rock for many years, and Little Rock, for its size, still tends to be kind of a small town, so we knew each other well that way, and I knew that she was very competent and would be a good contributor, and so I asked her, and she said yes, eventually.
Well, the rest is history. So we're going to take a break, and we'll have Lisa on after our break. We're very excited to be back with a special guest that we briefly introduced just a second ago, Lisa McNeir. And Lisa is a retired psychologist and has been a wonderful addition to our Braver Angels Arkansas team, as she has worked with us in helping getting the Braver Angels Arkansas statewide effort underway, and helped us do trainings and workshops and all kinds of things. So Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I was getting tired or kind of exhausted listening to all the activity we've all been engaged in.
It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I want you just to do a little bit of introduction to yourself, and what do you do? What brought you to this work?
Well, as I know Glenn has mentioned before, that I'm a retired psychologist, and I consider myself something almost an Arkansas native because I've been here most of my adult life. When I was working, as a therapist in a private practice, I specialized in seeing families and couples, but particularly working with teenagers. So I think that also, I think, made me understand a little bit of the Braver Angels concept when Glen approached me. We had worked together in our state organization, doing a lot of projects, continuing education, and different types of things together, and with other psychologists. When he mentioned it to me, I was pretty intrigued. And so I think I was somewhat of an easy recruit.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things I was going to ask you, but I guess that would sound like a loaded question, like, how did you first come to Braver Angels? But just tell me anything else about that, but also kind of what has kept you here?
What's kept me engaged with Braver Angels is that when it's been a difficult time, and the training intrigued me initially. So that was the beginning. And I saw all the possibilities. I understood what the people who developed the programs, I really appreciated the thoughtfulness and kind of the respect for individual differences and the limits of what you can do in a training program that's not a therapeutic relationship, and they're very clear about that. But it was that respect for individual differences and the goals that are about inclusiveness and civility, and also being able to appreciate who you are. It's not about converting people. It's about understanding and connecting with people, and that really drew me in. What's kept me engaged is really working with people like you and April, and the people that we meet along the way when we're doing workshops and trainings. That it just renews my optimism and respect for the capacity for people to put aside their anxiety and fears and really engage in conversations that are meaningful to them.
You mentioned about being a retired psychologist, and we know that there are some similarities in the kind of things we can do and skills with Braver Angels. But I also remember, we all as moderators were trained by National. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the training you went through with National about how to be a moderator, anything that was maybe something new that you hadn't already encountered from psychology.
Yeah, that's really was important, a big realization for me. I thought that I would transfer all my skills over and it'd just be, a snap. When you're working, I'll tell you what was similar. I mentioned that I worked with high conflict families sometimes and couples, but my specialty was adolescents, and a lot of times that they're coming in because they are angry or their parents are angry, and so I'm comfortable with that, and I thought that would be helpful. But when you're working with families and when you're working with individuals, you have time to really get to know them personally. In fact, it's important to get to know them personally. And you invest a lot of time in building that individual relationship. So that is a difference. But a similarity is a comfort with being able to tolerate high conflict situations, and probably the really biggest one that I see as a similarity between the two is the goals that I kind of alluded to a few minutes ago, that Braver Angels is the whole program, all the workshops are centered around respect and civility. And in a time when polarization is so rampant and people really stop seeing each other, that we become labels and they're the other people and they all think this way and they all feel this way. It's so dehumanizing. And certainly in my work as a therapist, it's really important that you get to really know who you're working with and that they are humans, not a problem. And similarly, I think with Braver Angels, that is absolutely the goal of the training, to remember that and to help other people, participants, to remember that. We're human beings and we're not just a label, and we're not just this rigid bundle of ideas and beliefs that has no subtlety or nuance. So, but what I learned a lot about myself going through the trainings, because I love my work and I love getting to know people, and I love, asking questions and going down rabbit holes of information sometimes, because you don't know this person, and if it's important enough for them to share with you, you want to be able to hear it, because you don't know what you're going to learn about someone. And in Braver Angels, that doesn't really work very well. It's really important. One of the things that makes the Braver Angels model work and the training programs work is that we have all these guardrails. We want people to be genuine and able to express their ideas and beliefs and share openly and honestly. But we keep it targeted on a topic, whatever the political topic is or whatever the issue is everyone's agreed to discuss. And the side stories and the sort of tangential roads we can go down when we're talking about something that can be pretty emotional has to be redirected. And so it was a different discipline for me I certainly have had to redirect people in therapy sessions, but this was a group, and it was a real, very defined redirection. And people know that up front when they get engaged. We kind of go over all those rules. But I found that I would slip up a lot of times, really want to listen to some sort of other idea someone was expressing, and we had to correct. So that was probably a big challenge for me to work through.
So similar skill set, but a little bit different as well. Well, I can imagine that as a therapist, as a psychologist, you also got into that work because you wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And I'm thinking about with Braver Angels, similar in terms of impact. I mean, have you been able to see impact and see that it makes a difference, the work?
If you have a really solid therapeutic relationship with people that you're working with in my profession, what you hope for and often get to see that was so wonderful in the work that I did and my fellow psychologists do is when people go, oh my gosh, the impossible situation I thought I was in is not really that impossible. And I think that is very similar with Braver Angels. I get to see people coming in going, I don't understand how this works, or do we have to talk? Sometimes when I've asked people, friends encourage them to go to training or get involved, they're like, I think this is real important that y'all do this work, but I don't want to be talking to a group of strangers about my feelings and beliefs about gun control, immigration, abortion. These are the kind of issues that we bring up and actually address. So I have seen people not also make those kinds of stunning, surprised reactions to the fact that they are talking and didn't believe that they would be able to talk about it. So I'm going to share a story with you about one person that actually someone I knew and a friend of theirs said, we were doing these trainings, but we were doing a series of civil conversations, which was over really an election kind of period of time. In the last election, we started in late December of 23.
I can't remember.
And then, but went into 24 the election, and so so I knew the woman, but she came up to me afterwards and said, I came to this because this other person said I really needed to come, and she said I was assured I wouldn't have to talk and I wouldn't have to express my beliefs, that I could just observe everyone, and I was curious. And she said, if you would have told me that I would have actually not only shared my thoughts and beliefs about what the topic of that day, but in front of strangers, that people I'd never met before, I would have called you a liar. So this was a person who's very thoughtful, very sophisticated and everything, but it told me several things. One is that this really does work, that this person felt very, very comfortable opening up. We'd done, the setting had been that supportive and that welcoming, that people who think that they can't talk about difficult issues find that they can. And that's so
Powerful.
rewarding and very powerful. Yeah.
So you've done several workshops, and you've alluded to the fact that a lot of people seem a little reluctant to the idea of coming. Can you tell people anything about what a workshop is like? And I know they're different depending on the one you were having at the time, but something that might help people decide, oh, well, maybe I could handle this.
Yes, and I think the use of the word reluctant is very generous. Like, no way I'm going to do that. I have a favorite one, and this is when I'm talking to someone who's curious about it, I'll give them an example, and they go, that is really interesting. So in one little exercise we do sometimes in some workshops is we'll divide people who identify as conservatives or Reds, and they go to one side of the room or some area where they can talk, and then the blues or the people who have identified as more liberal, and they get to identify themselves. And we ask them to do this, 3 columns. You list every stereotype you've ever heard or know that has been made about your group. And so they'll go through and let's say it's the blue group or the liberal identified group. And they'll say, and they call us snowflakes, child killers. I mean, some of them get real dramatic. You know, we don't believe in religion, and we want, you know, we're going to become socialists, or I don't know. There were several. You know, they'll go through a list. And then in the next column, they get to refute these stereotypes. You know, what is it about that statement isn't true? And you do this as a group. And so they go through and list all the things that they say, well, that's not really accurate. You know, here's an example. You know, my faith is very important to me. You know, I love children. And you get to elaborate a little bit about that. But the third column is the clincher. It's what part of that stereotype is true? Is there a grain of truth in that? And what I really like about that particular exercise is that, first of all, it really makes you look at yourself. So that's a good place to start for people, and going, you know, loosening them up a little bit, you know, kind of digging in and going, ooh, you know, can I say this? But it also ends up with a lot of laughter sometimes, where people go, well, you know, I kind of do think there should be free education for everybody, or I really do think this way, or but it's nuanced. And then the groups come together and they share. And I think it's one of those exercises that really kind of speaks to the heart of this whole notion of we're more alike than different, and we have the capacity to look at ourselves, to have some humor about ourselves, be honest with ourselves. And I just think it's a great starting place.
You know, one of the things I love about that exercise, and I've done multiple of those workshops, the red-blue workshop is the one that this is typically done in. Although you can do that exercise with any topic, really, that has people from different sides to it, whether it's red or blue.
You can do it in a family.
You could do it in a family. What's the stereotype of, you know, this person? And one of the things I really love about that is that it allows people to, first of all, recognize that they may have actually been incorrectly labeled.
Yes.
Or correctly, and there might be some truth to it, but there's some intellectual humility also that is present when they say, well, what is the reason, what is the truth here that could be part of it? You know, another exercise in that same workshop is the fishbowl exercise. You remember that one?
Yes.
Where they actually have to sit and actually talk about their own group, and they talk about what basically they're bragging on their group, and then what concerns they have about that group also shows intellectual humility.
Yes, and you know, those, I think when people can reclaim their sense of empathy and compassion, if you bring that back into conversation, it just really enhances the possibility to have a really open, honest discussion with respect for each other. That it needs to be there. It helps with that dehumanizing thing that happens with polarization. People become human again, and it's it's not a small thing.
As a psychologist, why do you think we dehumanize people?
I think there's a few factors. I think when people are either, they get scared. Sometimes they're frustrated with how things are going. They get scared, maybe even really enraged, and about injustices that are valid. And then I think that one of the worst things that happens is they start to feel hopeless. Like there is no way out of there. And that, if most of us have had that experience at some time in our life, about just don't see how we're going to get out of this situation, or I don't think that things are ever going to get better for me or the people that I love. And I think that fuels some rage, and in the worst, and that sense of hopelessness, and the worst terrible things that can happen. It could even lead to violence, you know, attacking other people that you think you can blame for the situation you're in, or harming self. I mean, that happens as well. So, and then I think that that's human. I think all of us have been in that place. But I think when that sense of fear and anger and frustration gets exploited and stoked, and people are going, you are right to feel that. Those are the people that are making you feel that way. And it happens both, you know, and on any side of any issue. I think that's the danger. I think that's what leads to the polarization and that we've talked about, and dehumanizing. It's like you get to be enraged with someone because they don't matter to you.
Yeah, we talked about the tribalism tendency, which I think is part of that. When you identify enough with one tribe, it's good to have a group cohesion. The downside is the out group, right? And so when you have the out group, that's when you start to dismiss their worth or even their humanity, because we're right, they're wrong, and some primitive part of your brain is saying they're a danger to my survival.
I'd go a step further and say that there's also a loyalty that I know you know that comes with tribalism, and so another level of fear is if I question my tribe, they might kick me out, or they might come after me because I've questioned this cohesive, you know, thought process. Yeah. So people can get really locked in, really locked into that.
So we've already established you're a now retired psychologist, but given your background and your knowledge in that area, I wonder if you have any thoughts about particular things about polarization or the kind of work that we're doing that you could comment on that might be different from what maybe someone with a political science or a journalist background might be thinking of when they see this whole affair.
Well, I think polarization can happen on lots of different levels, and we can become polarized. Anybody can become polarized around issues. But I think sometimes your background in certain areas can help you navigate that a little bit better. So, for instance, if you've been exposed to a lot of different people and a lot of different ways of seeing the world, you might be less prone to that. But I also think the same people whose job is to get to facts and truth can sometimes skew that truth as well. And that's really what's dangerous that can happen with the people that we rely on, the journalists and the researchers who we say, help us make sense of what's going on here. You know, what's really happening in this situation? So that's kind of a complicated question, because I really respect and appreciate the journalists and the researchers and the people in media who are trying desperately to get to the truth and let people have that information to make decisions that are right for them. And I think that mostly happens, quite frankly. And when the times or the situations when it doesn't, I think it's dangerous. But I'm kind of believing in the good of. I really do. I think most journalists are really committed to looking at facts and trying to understand what's happening and what they're reporting.
You know, you mentioned a few minutes ago about hopelessness and how fear can sometimes lead to hopelessness and thinking you can't really make a difference. You must think there's something about this work that can make a difference in order for you to remain in it. You've been in it for a while now. What is it that brings you hope?
You know, I have felt hopeless at times, and it's been a hard period for us as a country, and sometimes it just gets discouraging. You read the news, and it's like there's another calamity, or there's another school shooting, or there's another. You know what? Why are we not making headway with some real problems in our country? And I'll get real discouraged, and I'm thinking, why am I continuing with this braver angel stuff? It's not going to make a difference. I mean, I've had those thoughts, of course, because it just feels like we're just chipping away, and maybe that is what we're doing. But then we have a civil conversation, and the person who came up to me afterwards and said, "I can't believe this. I can't believe applying these skills works," or, you know, this is exciting, and I go, okay, this is why I do this. It does work, and my optimism gets really kind of repurposed, and I think this is as much a gift to me as it is to just volunteering for a good cause. It's really enriching my life as well, and it reminds me that there are so many good people and so many people that are just feeling lost and uncertain and quieting their voices, which I think is also very, very dangerous.
You know, one of the things I think about, I think we all get tired of doing good work, whatever the good work might be, maybe with our family, our church. You know, we just maybe need to take a sabbatical from it for a little bit. But I do think about some advice that one of my mentors in Braver Angels that I would not have met had I not been in Braver Angels. He lives in Texas. But he asked me, he always asks me whenever he talks to me, "So how are you doing?" And I'm like, I'm doing okay. You know, and sometimes it's about, you know, how I'm feeling about the current political situation. Sometimes it's about my family, you know, and answering that question. Sometimes it's about the weather. But I remember one specific time that he said to me, "You know, what brings you joy in doing this work?" And I said, well, one of the things that brings me joy, and you mentioned this earlier, is moderating. He says, then you need to go and moderate another workshop. Because in the moderation, I mean, when I end up doing these national workshops, a lot of times there'll be 100 people that attend over Zoom, right? And so hearing them talk about their experiences and give feedback about what they thought, and hearing them kind of wrestle with what's difficult that they're kind of struggling with, and then maybe even shift a little bit in their thinking towards the other during that workshop is very, very rewarding.
It is, and it's similar to what I loved about the work I did as a psychologist. You know, in practicing my profession, it just renews my faith in people, and reminds me that there's still plenty of reason to be optimistic, but also it reminds me of the importance of people claiming their voice and having the courage and feeling that there is enough support for people to listen to them and want to hear their voice.
What does that mean, to claim your voice? Because I think about that
It's an
sometimes.
old psychology term.
Well, okay, I don't know what it means then. Okay, so tell me.
Well, I think when you're afraid that what you say might alienate people that are important to you, or someone might come after you, that your opinion just doesn't matter. And you have all these thoughts going on in your head, and sometimes they're just questions and you're confused. Claiming your voice may be just voicing your confusion and asking for clarity and asking people to explain things to you. That's one level of claiming your voice. And the other is, I don't feel the same way you do. That's claiming your voice, and that it's okay that we aren't all carbon copies of each other. It's really what makes our humanity so rich and interesting, that people have so many different perspectives and different ideas, and we're not going to agree with all of them, ever.
And that doesn't mean that they're a bad person or that we're a bad person.
Yeah. So I wonder if you have there are hopefully people out watching that might be interested in improving their ability to have some of those difficult conversations. For people like that, do you have any particular recommendations, maybe something you'd emphasize to them that they could handle in their everyday interactions?
Well, that's interesting, your choice again of words, everyday interactions, because I'm trying to remember if y'all have even mentioned this in the introduction today, that, you know, this has carryover, not just about talking about political differences.
Oh, good point.
That our everyday interactions that are high, that can be conflictual, can be about very personal things and, you know, differences among family members or friends, people you work with, anyone you're in community with. So I think the training that's in Braver Angels is really useful for some basic skills. You can get that other places. You can work with a therapist. You can, there's workshops that are similar. I do think the Braver Angels model is very precise, and the trained moderators get very good training, and the skills are broken down where people can really understand them very clearly. So that's you know, certainly I recommend our workshops just for a variety of reasons, but if people are curious about that, they can go online. Mm-hmm. Braver Angels, the national organization, has a website, and you can actually watch some of these workshops and get your, you know, just get your foot wet a little bit, put your toe in the water a bit. So I think that there are different avenues that people can, but I think the first step is identifying, I'm not feeling heard, I'm really confused, I'm really frustrated, that those are great indicators that you need to reach out somehow. And maybe if someone has a friend or somebody that's involved in something, they're noticing that they're feeling more comfortable talking about issues, they might just talk to a friend about that. What do you do? How did you get so comfortable talking about these issues? And they may make a recommendation. So I think I'm going to promote Braver Angels, of course, but there are other avenues, and I think it's just asking around and saying, you know, I am troubled, and for anybody else to respond to that.
Don't do this alone.
Don't.
There are
Exactly.
people that are doing this that you can come and join.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well put.
About 1 minute left of this interview, so any more points of advice, things you would like our listeners to know?
I'm really trying to not give so much advice lately.
You are retired, yeah.
No. Even when you're a psychologist, the whole thing is not about advice.
That's true.
It's about getting people to be their own psychologists, internalize a psychologist, their own voice of questioning, because it is about questioning. It is about getting clarity, and clarity about who you are, what you believe in, what you really care about. And over again, in our workshops, people find common ground where they thought they never would.
That's a biggie. Lisa, we're about out of time, so I just want to let you know how much we appreciated having you on and talking with us and sharing your insights. I appreciate what you had to say. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And all the work that you've done over the years with this organization and for bridge building and helping other families. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure working with the two of you.
Well, April, that was a fascinating conversation with Lisa. I really appreciated some of the things she had to say. Kind of wondering what stuck with you about that.
I was so glad that she brought out some of the things that we do in our workshops. It made me think again. It's been a while since I've done one of the Red Blue workshops as a moderator again, about the power of the tools themselves that have been developed in Braver Angels that people can use to actually kind of understand themselves, but also see if they can find common ground with other people. And that was one thing that stuck with me. And then, of course, she's a psychologist. As I asked the question about what advice that she would give to our listeners or to us, and I don't give advice. And I thought that's interesting because that's kind of the philosophy here. We're not trying to change other people. We're really getting to think about myself and where I'm coming from and the questions that I might be having and how I want to improve my own communication with other people, and that just seems so familiar to me when I think about Braver Angels and what we do with this work. What about you?
Well, for me, several things. I was just really impressed with a lot of the points she made, but I thought it was really interesting, her description of the training that you go through to be a moderator from national. It's online, so if anyone's interested out there, don't worry about it. It's not terribly difficult, but she made the point of how some of the skills and attributes of a good moderator for Braver Angels is similar to like what she's done as a psychologist, but there were also some very important differences, perhaps because we have slightly different areas that we target in those two fields.
You know, I found that to be interesting too, because initially when I got trained to be a moderator, I thought it was going to all be the same as what I do in my everyday teaching. And I found that there were multiple things that I had to do differently, and learning about how to do those in order to be able to do workshops for Braver Angels was interesting. Another thing that I found interesting that she talked about was a sense of hopelessness. And I wonder how often I have felt that, or our listeners might have felt that. It's like things are never going to change, and then how do people get involved? And when I think about that, I think about the statement that a former student of mine said, and I learned this from the student actually. Other people probably have heard this statement from others, which is all politics is local. And we sometimes forget about politics being local, and we think it's just going to be left up to the individual, the people that we elect for office to actually make a difference. But Braver Angels says we all can play. Citizens.
That's right. Citizens. Don't leave it up to the politicians and professionals. You know, that's actually a very important point that our country's founders made back when they were writing about this new constitutional democratic republic they had created, is that in order for this to survive and thrive as a new system of government, it needs to involve people, the average people and the citizens, getting involved in their government or their community in some way. They also talk about things like virtue, which we don't hear that word much now, but you might say character or values or morals, but people with virtuous standards and that actually impacted their behavior in a positive way, that was important for the health and survival of our government. And I guess things like that. Education. They talked about how it's important that people be educated. So I think all of those say citizens are important. I mean, think about it. This democratic process we have involves making decisions. And if a citizen or if the citizenry wants to be impacting the decisions that are made, they have to make their decisions at the local level, and that may be, for instance, educating themselves about candidates, making sure they go vote, but vote based on an educated evaluation of the candidates, not just because, ooh, I like that name, I have an uncle that name, that kind of thing. So it's really important, and I think the other thing about this, the virtue part, that relates to values, and that's something that struck me about Braver Angels, is that we emphasize values. You know, we have our own politics in our personal life, but when we have our Braver Angels hat on, we don't advocate for a politician or a party or a position. Instead, we are, in my mind, this is the way I see it, we're advocating for certain values. We're advocating for a democratic form of government of some sort. We're advocating for people to respond to their higher values rather than the base strong emotions of anger and fear and tribal identity and that sort of thing. So those are some of the reasons I think that it's important for people to be involved at whatever level they can. I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned our democratic form of government, and just to clarify, you're not talking about democratic like Democrats.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the other...
Absolutely or absolutely not?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
We're talking about a small d, I think, is the way they describe it, the democratic form of government. Now, the other thing that sometimes comes up, I hear people say, well, now that's not legit because we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And that's wasn't it what Ben Franklin said? The lady asked, well, what kind of government do we come up with? Well, a republic if you can keep it. The thing is, by most people's accounts, a republic is just another form of democracy. It's a representative democracy, where a direct democracy is everybody gets together and makes the decisions, but in this case, we get together through elections and vote our representatives who go in and make the decision for us. And if we don't like their decisions, we have the option to vote them out. So most people would say saying republic is not a democracy is like saying a Ford is not a car.
Mm-hmm. You know, for many years, I actually thought that my only responsibility as a citizen was to vote. Maybe I would go, you know, to the steps of the Capitol and be with a group of people supporting an issue, but I never thought about some of my responsibility could actually be working together with others who are different than me. And that's a gift that Braver Angels gives. And one of the things that we really hope our listeners will take from this is that if you are interested in this work, that you actually look up and see what Braver Angels stands for. But there are many bridge building organizations. We would love to start local groups, local civil conversations, local people that get together across their differences to do citizen-led solutions to community problems, or to have specific, you know, workshops. Maybe there's an issue that's caused the community to kind of get up in arms, but not everybody agrees. Well, we have tools that are structured dialogue tools that can help people actually have those kinds of conversations. But we hope that there are people out there listening and saying, I would love to do this, but I don't know how to get involved. And so how would they even start to get involved?
Well, probably the easiest thing to do is go to our, okay, let's make two distinctions. The national organization and our Arkansas organization, Braver Angels Arkansas. If you do national, go to braverangels.org. And there's a lot of information there. They even have some what they call e-courses, brief online courses that teach you some basic skills, even something on social media, interestingly. If you want to do something with us in Arkansas, which we would love, is to volunteer. And you can go to our website at arkansas.braverangels.org, and we have contact information there where you can contact us. We have a survey online that you can fill out and give us some information, or just send to this one email that I think would go to you and say, hey, I'm interested in hearing more, and we'll talk to you about it. We can work up a time to meet, or talk over the phone, or a Zoom call, or whatever, and tell you what we could use. But I'll tell you what, I have not found anyone who's been interested in volunteering that we couldn't use in some way. Mm-hmm. We have some areas where there are skills that we need more than others, but everybody who's interested, we can usually find what their interests and their skill levels are and find some way to use them. So please holler at us if you're interested.
You know, the national, with our new CEO who came in last July, gosh, he's been in for the National Braver Angels, he's been in almost a year now. He talks about that there are many different paths to get into this bridge building work, and one of them is to get educated ourselves. One of them is to do reading. Another one is to actually get trained as a moderator, or get trained as an ambassador, or debate chair, for example. But showing up to a civil conversation meeting, or starting one. We're going to have a guest on that's going to be talking about civil conversations. He's going to be doing them across the state. And so that would be an opportunity to get involved with people who may have different opinions, but you can learn that you can talk to them. So I do think about that there are many different ways. The other thing that Lisa made me think about is that these skills are really skills for everyday conversations. We'll be talking in future episodes about a skill set that we call the LAP skills. And so those LAP skills are listening, acknowledging, pivoting, and perspective, just to kind of give a preview. But we're going to be talking about how those can be used even in a non-political environment. So a person says something to you that you don't fully understand, or you kind of react to, rather than immediately just jumping to conclusion, you can ask them a question or acknowledge what they've said to see if you're hearing them correctly, and tell a little bit more about what it is that you're thinking and hearing at this point. And so I do think that these skills are transferable to other kinds of settings as well.
Yeah, they do come, many of the skills do come from some of the basic things that you and me, our respective traditions and disciplines share. You know, communication, conflict resolution, you know, the things that therapists use. It's just like I said one time previously that I learned them and I used them in my work as a psychologist before I retired, but the idea of using them in politics and political conversations was a new idea, but what a powerful one it is.
Yeah, we have to be open. I oftentimes tell my students about conversational receptiveness. It's this idea that I'm open to hearing things that are different than what I expected and what the norm is. Well, if people want to learn more about Braver Angels in the meantime, you can find us at arkansas.braverangels.org. And our podcast, on the other hand, is available wherever you listen to podcasts or on our Braver Angels Arkansas website. Again, that's arkansas.braverangels.org.
And remember that we're going to have episodes of Braver Arkansas show up on our podcast eventually.
That's right. So people can hear it and listen to it, or they can watch it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being with us. We look forward to our next episode, and we'll see you next time.